Page Panel Frame coming at you live. So today I'm talking about it. I'm talking about phase 2 of Stranger Things. This is the first time Stranger Things has been broken up into 2 parts of a season. And this is my favorite season of Stranger Things. Just to briefly talk about it. The first one, I feel like that was a good setup for characters. Just a nice contained story. Season 2 seemed like it was kind of reaching for new ideas, which I don't really think worked. Season 3 was kind of a return to Season 1, where we had this big mall everything was centralized around, and it kind of stuck to the roots of Season 1. It was a fun time with those dark elements. And so going from Seasons 1 and 3 into Season 4, I figured we'd see a lot of the same. And when I was first watching Season 4, I didn't really like the different storylines. That soon changed, and once we got that tone, I was hooked. Once we saw Vecna, the way he kills, just his strength, his sense of smartness, I guess. He's a great villain, and man, I was excited for these last 2 episodes. And so going into episode 8. Episode 8 is the first of these 2, and it's the shorter one. And this is very much a setup episode. This is not your bombastic climax end of the season. So we have some main setup points. We learned that Vecna needs to kill 4 people in order to open this big gate. That's what his master plan is, to kill 4. We learned that Vecna, his curse is still, Max can still feel it. She can still feel that he's there. So there's this climax building up as to is he going to go after Max? How's that going to all play out? We have Elle's story conclude where she's with Papa and the other scientists, and we learn that Papa dies, but Elle finally regains her powers, and she seems to be very strong. So there's a lot of questions. Is she going to be that big force that kind of saves the day like she was in a lot of those previous seasons? And then we also get what I think is a very cringy moment in the second to last episode. We get the gun prep, which I'm fine with that with the main cast, but it's when these basketball players get these guns and they try to act all intimidating. There's something about that because I don't know if I find these high school basketball players intimidating or as a big antagonistic force. I guess if they have guns, this is kind of a rural area. Maybe they know how to use their guns, which as we see later on when he's practicing shooting, they do in fact know how to use them. But I don't know, I thought that was a bit cringe. Or maybe not necessarily cringe, but it didn't feel as strong as, say, Vecna. That seems it almost seems like a love triangle of antagonists, where Vecna's the main one and here's this side one. I was fine with this episode. I was fine with one big setup. This is a big setup, and it's going into a 2.5 hour movie-like climax for this season. And I had super high hopes. So I guess the main question, did this disappoint? I had super high hopes. There's so much setup going on, and we have just 2.5 hours of climax. Now, to answer that question, I was not disappointed. I think this definitely delivered. There were some questionable things, which I'll get into, that I don't know if they necessarily worked for me, but overall, I was super satisfied with this season. Okay, going back to episode 8, we get this. If the episode finishes with this setup where Max, Lucas, and Lucas's sister are returning to Henry's old house, which Henry is number 1, and they're preparing for this big plan they have. And we know the plan is coming soon. We've seen Elle try to get into contact with them to stop this plan, but that fails. So we have 3 storylines. Again, throughout the season, we have multiple storylines, and that is both a pro and con, I think. But we have the storyline in Russia. We have the storyline in Western America, near the Grand Canyon, I think it was. But none of these 2 groups of characters can reach the main cast in Hawkins. That's where the 3rd storyline is. And I'm going to quickly talk about Season 4. So throughout Season 4, I liked every storyline except for Elle's, and that mostly has to do with the fact that I don't really like Elle as a character. I think for this psychokinetic like superhero that she is, she should have a lot more development as this character. But it seems like while there is some development, a lot of times it seems like every season she's kind of just crying there. But then we get that good setup with Henry. So I think Elle's story kind of like evolved into a good thing. The one story that I think the Russia story was pretty consistent. It was pretty consistently like great. But the storyline with Mike, Will, Will's brother, I'm forgetting some names. That one I thought started out really good, but then at this point it almost feels like it's just not needed. It's kind of like tacked on. Um, and here we get a lot of scenes that are meant to hold a lot of like weight and be just like they're not meant to come off as cringy. They're meant to come off as like heartwarming and just like good, feel good talks, I guess. But unfortunately, they do come off as like cringy. So we have Will's always telling Mike that he's kind of like the heart of the team. We have Mike telling Elle that he loves her during a huge climax. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of these, maybe because they're young actors, whenever they're trying to do these like big message developing scenes, I think it kind of misses the mark for me. And for that reason, I'm not the biggest fan of Mike and Will's storyline in this last episode. I also think Will as a character, it seems like his acting has just like not been on point this season. So I'm kind of taken out whenever they're on screen. But once we get back to this main plot with Vecna, where Eddie and Dustin are used as bait, while Robin, Nancy, and Steve Harrington are going in there for the kill, and Max is also being used as bait. I think that entire like scene was just riveting. That entire climax. I think this season Max really shined as a character. I think Dustin and Steve played off each other since season 3. I think Lucas and Max are probably the standout characters this season. And in this episode, he gives some great acting performances, which I'll talk about. But so I think one of the best scenes in here is when Eddie and Dustin are used as bait, and they do this by Eddie sets up his amp and guitar, and I was just thinking, I'm like, wow, this is a great setup. I didn't watch any of the trailers. I heard from a friend that that's in the trailers, but they don't go over which song that plays. And once he starts playing Master of Puppets by Metallica, I was just on board. I thought that was perfect. The tone, everything was just perfect. That entire scene, I've rewatched that scene maybe like 3 or 4 times already. And then we lead to Vecna versus Max, which, man, it's heartbreaking. I think that is another scene that I've been rewatching, and it is kind of dark because Vecna, he gets the kill on Max. You see Max floating up in the air, and you're kind of wondering, is she going to get saved again? Is Elle going to save her this time? And then you see Max, she loses like 3 limbs, and her eyes roll back, but Elle does save the day, we think. And then we get into our death scenes, which these are like the 2 scenes that I think it needed like great performance from child actors, or I guess they're not children anymore, but they still feel like it, just because I've kind of like grown up with them in a way. But we needed some really good performances during these death scenes, and I think they're done immaculately. We got Dustin and Eddie. Eddie dies. I think he was done kind of dirty. He's a new character. We've seen this happen so many times where a new character comes in one season and then they end up going. But yeah, you could really feel the pain that Dustin was in. I mean, Dustin's very like okay with being different, with being like a nerd, kind of like Mike. And Eddie's just like this symbol, just this proclamation of like his like way of life. The death scene that was done the best was Max's, and we see Lucas holding her in his arms, and she tells him that she can't see or feel anything, and like you look at her, at the state of her, and you're like, holy shit, this is terrible. They really took this in a dark direction, and Lucas is giving the performance of his life. I mean, I feel every word he says until I'm still feeling it, but the camera pans over to Elle, who, again, like, okay, this is definitely a time where she should be crying, but I feel like that's like the extent of her character. But every time Lucas is on screen, every time we see that, just Lucas Max, when she's like on the verge of dying and does die, I mean, you can feel that emotion. And then let's talk about when she does die, because now we have all four gates open. And I was not expecting this. This was way out of left field for me. We see these gates all expand and they grow and they kill the basketball dude who I hate. And they all create this massive earthquake throughout Hawkins and they all connect. And I'm sitting there. Like, I've been watching this for what feels like 2.5 hours. I mean, it went by so fast. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, this is like Infinity War. Now, if you haven't seen Infinity War, I'm going to put some spoilers, or I'm going to talk about some spoilers there. But we have the bad guy win. Even though Vecna got Molotov twice, shot like 4 times, the bad guy won. These gates, like, they went through. His plan succeeded. Max died. And I don't know where this is going to go. Like, this, I think, I almost thought, like, if they ended it there, that would be the better ending. Also, one thing I forgot to mention is we have this scene that makes you think, I don't think we're directly told, but we assume that Elle saves Max's life because she like touches her when she's dead. And this then leads into this 2-day closure scene. I think they wanted to give closure for kind of what just happened. And we do, in a sense, need to see that. But I don't think it was handled in the best way, because once we get this 2-day later cutscene, everything seems all bright, sunny, and happy. And I'm just like, what? That's like a complete tone shift. But then we get the scene with Dustin and Eddie's father, where he talks about Eddie's death. And I thought that was so hard hitting until certain camera angles were used where Eddie's dad, it looked like he was laughing, not crying. And I guess this is another time where Dustin, like a younger actor, is having to give this like very heartfelt scene, heartfelt performance. And it seems like he just carries it on too long. He's talking to his father who's crushed. His son has been, he's been labeled as a terrorist, and now he learns that he's dead. And Dustin's like saying that he's a hero for the town. I don't know. A lot of times I feel like during something like that, somebody would just want to just fester those emotions and just like let out their crying, versus being like told everything's going to be okay, even though Dustin doesn't necessarily say that. And it was at this point that, like, I don't know, with the tone shift, I thought the gates may be closed. I mean, we see there's damage and like residue from the gates opening, but we don't see the gates themselves. And then we get the whole closure with Winona Ryder and Hopper all returning. Elle sees him again, which was all fine. And then Will gets this sense that something's off. And then we see the gates are still open and still going. And man, I'm telling you again, this was like Infinity War. This was an ending I was not anticipating. And to see the bad guy win, to see, well, I don't think they stuck with that tone like Infinity War did. I think it was just a great send-off for the season. And for a 2.5-hour finale, a huge climax, I was very, very satisfied. There are those like few things that bothered me: the Mike, the Will storyline, some of the acting, the heartfelt scenes that didn't hit. But I think the ones that did hit so well. They hit so well. I rewatched Max's death scene, even though she comes back to life. She's not awake, but she's alive. It was Max's death scene, Eddie's death scene, and then the Master of Puppets scene. I mean, overall, I think this is my favorite season. And I haven't made any videos on Stranger Things, but to speak on it as a whole series, I think it's, if I were to rate this series, I think as a whole, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. And I don't want to make this episode about a rating, but I think an 8 out of 10 kind of like it really proclaims kind of like how I feel about the show, where I have a lot of issues with it. But every time I watch it, I have a blast. I love this show, and this season is by far my favorite. If I had to rank them, season 4 is by far my favorite, and then season 1 is probably second favorite, then season 3, then season 2. But man, this season, it was an awakening for how good Stranger Things can be when it's at its best. And looking forward to season 5. Hopefully it doesn't take that long to get to us. And yeah, sorry I haven't been making videos in a while, but I'm going to be talking about Better Call Saul when that comes out, because I have been loving that show as well. I'm finally caught up. And yeah, what did you guys think of this? What do you think of the season? Do you agree with my points? Do you have some different points? I would love to hear it. Put in the comments. Make sure to subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.